Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
By the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Keith. I am your host for today. I hope everybody is out there being safe, staying informed, and up to date in all of the really difficult times that we're having right now. Between the, I don't know, complicated situation with COVID and the now straightforward / complicated in air quotes situation with what happened in Minneapolis, a lot of people are experiencing a lot of things that they probably weren't expecting to have experienced in their lifetime. I know in my area we have curfews and all sorts of things that are being put in place to help prevent certain ill-willed people from taking advantage of a situation that they really have no business being involved in. So I hope that everybody is out there doing, what they feel is best and making sure that everybody involved is safe. So figured there's no reason not to mention at least a little bit about this particular thing, since it really is profoundly affecting everybody in the United States. And I mean, even in some capacities, the world. Apparently there's been some protests in Britain as well. So it definitely is an issue that needs to be talked about and needs to be, handled, if that's the right word. Regardless, I just wanted to mention that at the top. So this week we are not talking about Hyperion. Well, we are on Sunday, but not today. Today we're going to talk about a movie that just got added back on to Netflix in the last month, I want to say. That movie is called District 9. It is an excellent movie that was produced by Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame, and it was directed by a gentleman of the name Neil Blomkamp, who, as far as I can tell, hasn't really done a lot of other stuff that was successful. Seems like he's kind of in the science fiction vein, though. He's done movies called Elysium and Chappie. So I don't know how well those movies did. I haven't seen them personally. I haven't heard anything about them. So District 9 came out in August of 2009, which was right after I got out of high school. So just to kind of give you guys an age reference of how old I am. And the premise of the film is basically that approximately 30 years ago, aliens arrived on Earth, not to conquer the world or to give aid, but apparently to find refuge from their dying planet. And they are separated from humans, well, quote-unquote separated from humans, in a slum called District 9. And they're being kind of like managed, I guess, is the word that the summary uses, but I wouldn't say managed so much as monitored, by a company called Multinational United, which plays pretty heavily into the plot of the film. And there's kind of this like human rights violations type thing that is the constant, like, or kind of like a constant presence throughout the film, where there's these people who are basically trying to kind of like view the aliens as being more than just aliens, but also being in some capacity like an intelligent life form that deserves the same rights as human beings do, which I'm not contending with. I'm just kind of mentioning it's a part of the plot. And they are kind of like saying that they're trying to take care of the aliens, but they are really just kind of like amassing weapons, and then we find out doing some pretty shady stuff with alien bodies. Not shady stuff as in like explicit in the way that you're thinking, but shady stuff as in like experimentation and dissection. Basically, they're doing to the aliens, which are colloquially referred to as prawns, they're doing to the aliens what we always think aliens would do to us, which is like kidnapping us and then dissecting us in order to figure out more about us. But they're doing that with the explicit purposes of trying to like use their weapons. So I find there's definitely a lot of like interesting things in the storyline here that kind of like don't necessarily line up 100% with how the summary portrays the film. So I don't think that it's necessarily accurate. One of those things is that the aliens arrive and have a bunch of alien technology in the form of like very powerful weapons that absolutely are superior to human weapons in multiple capacities. But the aliens' bodies are still pretty fragile. Like, they can get shot and they'll die. And then, like, human weapons can affect the alien weapons. So it's not that they're so technologically advanced that they can't, that no one can fight back. It's mainly just that they have these weapons that do give them a decided advantage. And there's kind of like two camps that are trying to get at those weapons. But the reason that I say it doesn't necessarily match with the summary, so when the movie first opens up, it is kind of framed as if it's like a documentary, and they're talking about how that when the aliens arrived, everybody was super confused and they didn't know what was going on, and so the ship just sits there for a while, and then eventually humans are like, okay, well, we should just like go up and see if we can get into the ship and like make contact, because we don't know what's going on right now, and this could be really bad. So they go in, and then they like cut a hole into the ship, and when they get inside the ship, they basically find like a bunch of starving aliens, rather than like, like some sort of like science fiction-y, prosperous, everybody's happy type thing. But apparently the ship kind of like quote unquote crash landed, even though it's like hovering above Johannesburg in South Africa, which choosing Johannesburg is absolutely intentional. It's in South Africa. There's been a lot of inequity between certain individuals in Johannesburg. Maybe not Johannesburg specifically, but definitely in South Africa. As we all well know, things like apartheid and stuff occurred there. So it makes sense that a director who's kind of trying to make a commentary in the way that this director is making a commentary would pick a place like Johannesburg for the setting of the film. So we get to see these scientists and historians and members of the MNU kind of talking about like what it is that they do and why they're doing it and what the purposes and things like that. So the fact that the aliens when they cut into the ship, they find that they're malnutritioned and dying, and so they let them onto Earth and start feeding them and like giving them refuge, because they are kind of refugees in some capacity, which is never explained. But the presence of weaponry on the ship suggests to me that this is a species of alien that like was in a war of some capacity, and that's part of the reason why their ship like quote unquote crash landed where it did, and it's why they have weaponry. So I think that there's kind of like this subtle hint that the aliens are hiding something the entire time that they're here that the humans are trying to get at. And there's like just like multiple conflicts on all sides of like the aliens not valuing human life, humans not valuing alien life, and then like what the purposes of the aliens even are, and how they're like quote unquote assimilating or not assimilating into society, which is very kind of like interesting. They make specific mention of the fact that like aliens will derail a train and think it's funny. But like humans are like, that killed a lot of people and really inconveniences us, so you can't do that. And they have to like try to explain that to them because they're trying to like create some sort of like ability to cohabitate within the two species, and they can't seem to accomplish that, which I find to be interesting and obviously a very poignant commentary on interspecies relationships. He's definitely kind of making commentary on interracial relationships with this film. So we're going to talk more about that, more about the movie, right after this first quick commercial break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Right before the break, I was kind of talking about the commentaries, the miscellaneous commentaries that are being made in this film, District 9, which is on Netflix. Definitely check it out. I think I've recommended it before on the podcast, but it finally is streaming, so I wanted to watch it and have a little bit of discussion about it, just because I really enjoyed it. And I've liked it since it came out. It's actually one of the few movies that I own on DVD. Other movies that I own on DVD, probably. I don't know if it's important or if you even care. But I think it's just funny. When you look at like the mediums that we purchase things on, you know, VHS, laser discs, DVDs, Blu-rays. Now a lot of people own like a digital library of movies, or they just stream everything off of a server. Or it's just interesting the way that we kind of like consume and hoard media. But regardless, the director here is definitely kind of making commentary on the way that different cultures, and in, you know, some undeniable capacities, the way in which different races interact with each other. And so I was kind of mentioning that there is kind of like this hidden agenda on both parties' parts as far as like the aliens are concerned and the humans are concerned, though. The hidden agenda of the aliens is really just coming from me making inferences based off of the like deductions that I'm making. Those are all opinion. It's more of like a well, okay, obviously any interpretation is an opinion. I would argue that it's more of a fact that the company that is working with the aliens and quote-unquote managing them is much more blatantly underhanded and I don't want to use the word evil necessarily, but yeah, pretty much evil. They're much more blatantly treating the aliens poorly than the aliens are like poorly treating humans. So the film opens up, we see all of these doctors and scientists talking, and eventually they start talking about this one individual by the name of Vickers, who is our main character. He's kind of like this dorky Michael Scott type dude at the beginning that just doesn't seem like he knows what he's doing in any capacity, but is just so excited for everything. So the film starts with the premise that District 9 can no longer be in such close contact with the rest of Johannesburg because it's just outside of Johannesburg. And so they plan to move the aliens, forcibly move them from their homes to an encampment that's basically a concentration camp, to an encampment that's about 200 and some odd kilometers away from from Johannesburg. And like once you kind of get through the middle of the film, it makes a lot more sense why they would do that. It's going to give them a lot more it's going to give MNU a lot more access to the aliens without being under as close of scrutiny. And in addition to that, it kind of assuages the volatility of the relationship between the prawns and the human beings. And now prawn is used negatively in the film, but we don't get another name for them, so I will be using it throughout this. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that like prawn is kind of part of the negativity associated with the aliens. So we get Vickers going into the alien slums, the District 9, and apparently there is a group of gangsters who live in the slums with the aliens or who interact with the aliens and kind of like trade things back and forth with them. There's a specific gang member who has amassed a like pretty large cache of weapons, and that comes into play pretty heavily later on in the film. But we get Vickers in this documentary style going out to the slums to like show everybody in the documentary like, oh, look how excited I am. Like we're finding things and we're busting up crime and we're doing good things by moving these aliens. Like he's truly kind of bought into this idea that the aliens are going to be better off in their new living situation. But it's funny, there's like this weird amount of bureaucracy that's involved where MNU feels like, or MNU is kind of being forced by humanitarian groups to use like actual laws to kind of move the aliens around. And so they kind of enact this, it's like a gentrification. It's a piece of legislation that serves the purpose of being able to quickly gentrify an area. So they can like forcibly evict individuals from their homes within a 24-hour notice. But instead of like a 24-hour notice, they're kind of just like going in there and saying like, by the way, you're evicted. By the end of the month, you're going to be blah, 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 blah. And like normally they would have to like give 24-hour notice so that the person can kind of like try to remedy whatever problem they're being evicted for. But the aliens generally don't understand kind of like laws or property and things like that, or at least we're led to believe that they don't. It's mostly the reason they don't understand is probably because of the way that they're treated. They're not given any opportunity to really assimilate. They're kind of like put into this area and then being told like, hey, you need to follow our rules without being educated on the rules. So it's just kind of a way to like perpetually oppress and take advantage of them because they're not educating them on how to interact with another species that they would probably like to live peaceably with. And part of the reason for that is that there's this belief. Well, okay, the main reason for that is that the MNU wants to take all of the weapons that they can find from the aliens and hoard them until they can figure out how to use them themselves and then sell those weapons because MNU is like the world's largest arms dealer in this universe or something like that. So they have kind of spread this idea that the prawns are like the worker ants in this like alien society that they live in because they seem to be like less intelligent. And so they're like bribing them with cat food is specifically mentioned as something that like the aliens really, really enjoy eating, and they don't really know exactly why. So they're like bribing the aliens with cat food to sign these papers so that they can evict them. They're like using technicalities of like he slapped the clipboard that counts as a signature so we can move on to the next guy. They are threatening use of force quite frequently and kind of like wantonly killing the prawns as they go through. There's one specific character, he's a bald guy whose name I don't know, but he serves as like the private military of MNU. MNU employs mercenaries in there because they can't use like international forces or national forces because then they'd be beholden to more rules, so they use their own private military force. And there's some conflict between like the lead military guy and Vickers at the beginning where he's talking about how you're carrying too much ammunition, and the guy gets upset with him and says like, we don't really care about the rules, we just say that we do. And so that's obviously a conflict throughout the film. So we get to see like all these private military guys kind of just like baselessly murdering prawns as if they're not real things, but like Vickers kind of like sees the prawns as like more human in some capacity, and he seems to be fascinated by them. So the film kind of has like 3 or 4 different distinct chapters, and the first chapter is this documentary, and it goes by very quickly, and we get to this particular scene where we start to see things from the alien perspective, and we have these 2 aliens who are 2 prawns who are interacting in a shack that hasn't quite been searched just yet, who have been working on distilling, I would guess, or percolating, I don't know, this fluid into fuel, or well, it's not distinctly fuel. When we first see it, it kind of looks like a drug operation in some capacity. So we kind of think that it's a drug or something like that, and so we get to this shack with the private army and Vickers, and he's trying to evict them, and one of the aliens says, just be polite, they're going to search me if they find me, so like I have to hide this, or you need to hide this and then just be polite so that they don't come in and search the place, because if they come in and search the place, we're screwed. And so they, of course, the prawn that goes out and talks with the humans cannot interact with them positively. There's a child, a small baby prawn present that, oh yeah, I should mention the other thing too. But we're going to take a quick commercial break before I keep talking about this, so we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So welcome back. So I was kind of on this like the most kind of like the pivotal scene of the film. There's really 2 really big pivotal scenes and 3 kind of like chapters, if you will, especially stylistically. The cinematography in this film shifts pretty heavily from like documentary style to science fiction movie to like action movie. The action movie elements of the cinematography in this film are impeccable. There's like a few where they put the camera on one of those, like, I think they're called gimbals or something like that, and they run right in front of somebody as they're like running through a hallway. So the camera's like super stable, but this guy is like running around through hallways. And then there's like, this movie is rated R, and there's a lot of violence, just so everybody's aware, and a lot of gore. And so those like spatter on the lenses and like things like that. They did a really, really good job with the cinematography of like taking this from feeling like this weird bureaucratic social commentary into the arena of like a profound, or into the arena of like a more profound social commentary, while simultaneously being a very good, solid action movie. And the pacing, I've mentioned this several times before, pacing is one of the hardest things to do in film, where you're kind of like, I don't know, I guess accurately is the best word I could think to use, or like you're appropriately escalating the stakes as you go along. So I definitely, I really appreciated the ability that the director had to, and the writers especially had to kind of like make that happen. So the scene I was talking about before specifically is in this shack where I think Christian Johnson is the name given to the prawn by the MNU. And Vickers goes into this shack after the alien who's out front is confronted, and then I think he eventually is killed. I don't remember if he's killed before or after Vickers finds this particular thing. But Vickers goes into the shack and finds the setup that the aliens are using in order to make this drug or fuel or whatever, is black liquid. They refer to it as like the liquid. And he grabs the tube and presses a button on it, and it opens up and sprays a little bit of the fluid out, and it gets on his skin, and he inhales it and coughs, and I don't know, it seems like it's pretty benign at first, but it very rapidly makes him nauseous and he throws up. And like by the evening, things are getting pretty weird for him. When he goes back out to try to question the alien, like what's in the tube, the alien responds pretty negatively and breaks his arm, supposedly. And so he has it field wrapped by medics, and we kind of go about our business throughout the day, and what we find out is that Vickers, at the end of this, and he has a wife, and I believe a child is mentioned, a daughter, though we don't see her ever. He has a wife, and what we find out about halfway through the movie is that the wife is actually the daughter of the owner, or one of the higher-ups in the MNU. So his father-in-law is his boss, and there's a pretty big gap there between, the fact that his father-in-law, of course, hates him, and so kind of has maybe a little bit of a vendetta or, extra special expectations for him. So we get to this scene where there's a party. Vickers is still feeling sick from the fact that he inhaled this thing earlier. He ends up passing out and getting taken to the hospital. And so when he's in the hospital, they cut off the field dressing from the arm that was broken, and Vickers has an alien hand. He now has a hand that looks exactly like a prawn's hand. So there is pretty much the premise of the rest of the movie, is that the fuel that Vickers inhaled will slowly transform him into a prawn. And so the plot of the movie thickens pretty quickly from there. This is where we find out that they've been doing, or the MNU has been doing illegal experiments in their basement in order to try and figure out how humans can use the alien technology so they can start to reverse engineer everything. Because what we find out is that the alien weaponry has specific markers that make it impossible for it to be activated by anyone other than a prawn. And so the fact that Vickers now has a prawn arm is a pretty big deal. So they take him to the basement. He sees all of these atrocities that are being committed by the MNU, all this experimentation, and this straight up just torture of the prawn individuals, or the prawn species, I guess, for lack of another word. And he is forced to start using the weapons by the MNU because he has the alien hand. So they start switching weapons back and forth between his human hand and his alien hand to see if it works. And what we find out is that the scientists realize that he has somehow contracted some sort of disease or something or another to where he is going to turn into a prawn, and his DNA is perfectly split between human and prawn. And so they decide that they're going to dissect him and basically harvest all of his body parts and try to figure out how to imitate the transformation in some capacity so that they can sell that ability, or that I guess process, if you will, to interested buyers, so that they can start kind of selling the weapons as well. Or, like I said, reverse engineering them. Because they haven't been able to get the prawns to cooperate with them, because the prawns don't seem to be intelligent enough or have the desire to show them how everything works. And I don't think that the prawns all know how everything works. I think there's only a few that know how everything works. And I think this is the part where I kind of talk about my theory of the film a little bit more, I think that the prawns that know how things work were actually different aliens that were also had the same drug that was accidentally administered to Vickers. They had the same drug administered to them to turn them into prawns. Because if the hypothesis of these particular aliens, the prawns, if that hypothesis of them being the grunt workers is true, then what that says to me is that there's no reason for an alien species to have the technology and ability to mutate the DNA of one species into another species while retaining most of its intelligence and sentience. There's no reason for them to have that technology and to not use it as a method for enslavement. And what's interesting, and maybe this is definitely out in the weeds a little bit, is that I think that all of the refugee prawns are actually escapees from the original alien society that turned them into prawns. And so there's a little bit of an interesting kind of tension that I'll explore a little bit more right after this next quick commercial break.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
On our discussion of District 9 today. So before the break, I was kind of talking about some of my alternative theories as to things that maybe were considered to be a part of the film but weren't explicitly mentioned out loud. And I was kind of mentioning that I have this hypothesis that the aliens, the prawns, used to all be a different species of alien, and that rather than being refugees, they are escapees from their previous oppressors. And again, I had mentioned that the part of the reason I said that was that there was really no reason for a group of aliens with the advanced technology that the prawns seem to have to use their own kind as worker grunts, because they have a technology that allows them to mutate another species into a prawn while it retains some aspect of its original specieshood. And I think that would serve as kind of like the ultimate form of oppression, because you can alter the physical contingencies of a thing's existence so drastically that it becomes a completely different species. And if you as an alien species could do that, then why would you continue to reproduce in a way that solicited more of that individual type of being? You would just kind of leave the working jobs and that type of stuff to that species, and then you would just turn all the species that you conquer into that species. That's one more nefarious theory that I have. The other theory that I have is that the director and the writer of this film are kind of making a commentary on this idea of the universality of sentience as a whole. So basically, the aliens would be they would basically be the Borg, kind of. So they would go to a planet, they would conquer said planet, and as part of the conquering of that planet, they would turn everything on that planet into the same thing as them, which is kind of the ultimate form of assimilation. And they would then all be together as one, and there's this like kind of like universal oneness that is present in that idea, which could be viewed as being negative or positive. We would probably view it as pretty negative, but like I could see how a species could evolve to believe that to be a positive interaction. So I definitely think that there's a lot more to this that wasn't able to be included because the movie is only 2 hours long, and they probably wanted to spend a lot more of their budget on special effects, good cinematography, and action movie stuff rather than a bunch of money on like actors and more writing and more special effects to like effectively portray what it is that they were trying to portray with the idea of universal consciousness. I don't know what the premise of Chappie is. I may have to give it a watch just so that I can see if that's something that is kind of like a common thread. Like maybe Chappie is kind of like quasi-viewed as human in some capacity in that film as well. And so we get like a similar commentary of like, if it can think like a human, then it may as well be human. Because that kind of seems to be one of the commentaries that's being made in this film, is that people are still concerned with the treatment of the aliens even though they don't look anything like humans. There is mention of like interspecies prostitution, but no mention of the mechanics of it or of the possibility of like interspecies breeding. But I think that one of the things that the writer and the director are trying to accomplish is that they want to make meaningful commentary on the ways in which human beings interact with things that are unknown to them. There is this like evolutionary proclivity that we have as a species to fear and desire to control things that we don't understand, and we have a really hard time understanding things that look different from us. And that is like a natural occurrence within the human like instinctual blueprint, because individuals will, I mean, a good example of this is kind of what we're going through right now, right? Like there's an intrinsic fear of this other that doesn't look like me. We do it to animals too. Not that I'm conflating anything with animals. I'm just saying that this is like an example of human behavior. I just want to be clear about that. We take things that have alternative forms of consciousness and we put them in cages in zoos and study them and dissect them and treat them as if their life is not as meaningful. And in some very dark capacity, we as human beings do the same thing to other human beings who look different from us. It becomes very easy for individuals to dehumanize other individuals when those individuals don't live like us, when they don't look like us, when they don't think about the world the same way as us. And that's a natural evolutionary process. There is a reason for that. Now, of course, it's very easily trained out of our natural blueprint by simply connecting with true and meaningful empathetic approach. It's easily unprogrammed. Like, it's easy to get children to like, animals and things and to humanize them and to, have them form relationships with them. And it's even easier to do that with people who look different or think differently when you're a child. The human mind is incredibly malleable, and it will adapt to and confirm biases that that you believe yourself to have based off of external influences. And so when we're talking about like relationships between individuals of different cultures or of different races, quote unquote, then it's very easy to kind of like see the ways in which we can take advantage of the human blueprint of fear and also can kind of like deny it the ability to have any power over us, which is the way that we should go. Absolutely. There is a complete and total lack of empathy intrinsic to interactions with things that look different from us. Like even when it comes to people who maybe I don't like to use the word disability, but it's really the only thing in the lexicon that I have to refer to this. But like, even if we see like an amputee, like there's some part of us that kind of like fears that person in some weird way that's subconscious that we don't even know about. And the same thing happens when we interact with somebody of a different race or of a different culture, because they're so different from what we're familiar with that it becomes easy to just think like, oh, well, that thing or that person isn't the same as me, so, or isn't the same as I expect it to be. So there's a cognitive dissonance now, and there's a fear that can be easily played on by, any individual who wishes to manipulate that particular element of the human experience. So it's definitely a profound and meaningful commentary that the aliens show up as refugees or as escapees and are being taken advantage of by this giant global corporation who is just using them to acquire weapons and to hopefully profit off of their presence, rather than to like actually assimilate them into society and solicit a more meaningful relationship, or give them an opportunity to like trade their weapons on their own in a non-black market capacity. Like at every turn we see the MNU kind of like hamstringing the Prawn's ability to become human. And I think that it's very interesting that the Prawns in reverse have a way to force humans to become them, and that serves as their fuel source. So what that says to me is that, again, on my statement earlier about the fact that I think the Prawns are we're all formerly other alien species, the fact that it's their fuel source that does this means that it's probably pretty readily available when they're on their own planet, or when they're traveling, or when they're engaged in military conflict. There's really no reason for them to not have it be like plentiful. And there is, as Vickers turns into an alien, he gets to interact with the Prawn who originally made the fuel cell that caused his mutation and his transformation ultimately. He's able to interact with him, and that Prawn tells him, I can change you back. So that means that the expression of genetics is fluid to this alien species that either is the Prawns or is controlling the Prawns. And that in itself is a pretty interesting premise. Though I will say, I have some thoughts on that I will share right after this next quick commercial break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Some of my miscellaneous, I guess, conspiracy theories associated with District 9. Been talking a lot about the theory that the Prawns are actually a mutated version of other miscellaneous alien species that have all been mutated by one other species that supposedly uses them as worker grunts, or just mutates them in order to have them be assimilated into their, I guess, hive mind would be kind of like the right but not quite right term, because there is not the presence of a hive mind. There's no like universal thought amongst all of the Prawns. They all seem to have their own kind of like weird interactions with the world around them. Haven't really talked a ton about the plot of the movie, so I think I kind of want to cover that a little bit. So after Vickers starts to transform and we find out that the MNU has been committing basically infringing on, the aliens' rights to being treated humanely and doing illegal experiments on them, Vickers kind of goes on this mission to hide and figure out how to get rid of or stop the transformation that he's experiencing. And he at first thinks that maybe if he chops off something, it might incur or stop the transformation. Spoiler alert, that wouldn't work. It just means that he loses his thumb, which is interesting. And kind of, I don't know, it's not a funny scene per se, but it's definitely kind of weird. And then, he ends up running into the prawn that made the liquid and finds out that prawn has underneath his shack a hidden spaceship, landing ship that the, original mothership had released when it first started hovering over Johannesburg that people couldn't find, which is weird because they have footage of it falling, but they don't know where it went. And that to me says it either has some sort of cloaking device or it just, it fell at just the right time to where they didn't get the angle and then it's underground and somehow is able to be hidden. I don't exactly know how it is that they justify the fact that they can't seem to find it. Seems a little convenient for the sake of the writing in the movie, if I'm being honest. But, we find out that Christian, the main prawn that we interact with, who has a son who's very important to him, and serves as kind of the inspiration for several of Christian's antics, or heroic antics, I guess would be the right word. Which ultimately humanizes him more. Which we'll get back on the subject of humanization and dehumanization, probably after this segment here. But, we find out that he has been distilling this fuel so that he can go up to the ship to fly to get all the prawns off of Earth and leave. Or to go to the mothership so that he can beseech them to take the prawns off of Earth so that they can escape, I guess would be the right word, especially since they're being oppressed and taken advantage of. So we get these interactions with Christian. Christian asks where the tube is. Vickers says it's in the lab, 4 stories underground. And then he finds out that his wife has been being manipulated by the MNU to tell him that she no longer wants to be with him, but that she really does. And she calls him when the MNU isn't around, and they get a tracking beacon on him. Though I don't know if that call is any more or less scripted than the call that he has with her before that. So the MNU is able to trace the call and come to find him. And this is where the movie kind of really speeds up, because Christian and Vickers are able to escape, and they kind of basically decide look, we're going to go into the lab at MNU and we're going to get this tube back so that you can go and get to the mothership and you can come back and turn me back into a human, which is ultimately what Vickers wants more than anything else. And so the prawn, Christian, at first, Vickers says, no, we can't go get it. It's a suicide mission. He gets the call from his wife, decides that they're going to go do it. So they storm MNU using alien technology and are able to get back the vial. But in the process, Christian, the prawn, finds out also about the illegal experimentation on his people and feels convicted. And is basically, instead of using the small bit of fuel that he has to transform Vickers back into a human, he says, I'm going to have to go back to get more fuel and come back and get all of my people off of this planet rather than just turning you back into a human, because I can't let my people, I can't sit idly by while my fellow prawns are used as medical experiments and treated so terribly. And so Vickers is, of course, pretty upset about this, so he knocks Christian out and then kind of commandeers his ship so that he can go back to the mothership and then go ask himself to be turned into a human being again. But that plot ultimately fails. There is a bunch of I guess you could call it a love triangle, but it's not really a love triangle. It's more like a violence triangle where Vickers has interacted with the gangs that were acquiring all of the weaponry from the aliens. Because they also want the ability to use the alien weaponry. They come and inadvertently kind of rescue Vickers and a Christian, because the MNU assaults the shack where Christian and Vickers are, after the laboratory, after they steal the stuff from the lab, they follow them back to that shack. And so the gang ultimately ends up getting killed by this giant robot, and then that robot is like a mech suit that Vickers is able to control because he's got, half human, half alien DNA. And then Vickers goes back and ultimately decides to like fight the MNU in order to get Christian and his son to the mothership so that they can go and like get back to their mothership and get more fuel and transform Vickers back into a human. And so there's this whole scene, kind of like this transformation scene where Vickers turns from this like awkward, overly excited and optimistic guy into this like negative, gritty kind of hero type, who starts to like believe in something a little bit bigger than himself. And I think that that's like an interesting little side plot. It's not really the main point of the movie, in my opinion. I feel like a lot of the action just kind of serves to make the movie more sellable. There's really a lot more like commentary going on here, kind of like behind the scenes. So it definitely feels like the action is the commercial aspect of the film, and that this was supposed to be, or originally had been hypothesized to be, a headier film, but kind of got turned into something else. Just based on like the complex premises that are present throughout the film outside of the surface level stuff, kind of like, my hypothesis that the prawns are actually a bunch of other alien species that have been forced to transform into prawns by a different oppressive alien species. Like, I don't think that that's an accidental interpretation on my part. I think that there's definitely open-endedness put in by the writers to imply that that could be a thing. So, he ultimately ends up, of course, saving everything, and Christian and his son are able to get into the mothership, and it flies away, and everybody's happy, but the prawns that were there are still left there, and so we're kind of left on this, like, open-ended, like, is he going to come back? Because to me, there's an implication that Christian might be lying, that the prawn who made the fuel is lying, because it doesn't really seem like there'd be any motivation for him to transform Vickers back into a human. And their relationship is like one that's kind of goes back and forth between like, okay, why are you helping each other? Okay, now you've decided that you're going to be good to me rather than knock me out and steal my ship. I'm not mad at you for knocking me out and stealing my ship. The prawn, Christian, kind of seems to be very pacifistic in his approach to a lot of things, other than like storming a laboratory that's owned by like one of the largest corporations on the planet and murdering a bunch of people in the process. So we're going to kind of give final thoughts, wrap this discussion up right after this last quick commercial break.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
We are at the end of it all. I'm going to kind of give some final thoughts, wrap things up here, and get you all going on your merry way. So, overall, District 9, really good movie, definitely worth watching. I wanted to kind of like hit on the commentary that I think this film is trying to make socially before we ended today, because it felt profoundly poignant for the situation that a lot of people are currently talking about. The reason I say that is that the prawns are they're in some capacity forced to be where they are, whether by their own mistakes or by the mistakes of their other members of their own species or what have you. They are forced to inhabit the area just outside of Johannesburg that is given to them, quote unquote. And it turns into a slum pretty quickly because it's, they're not given any real resources, just like some food and like basic subsistence living type stuff. And then there's complex relationship between the prawns and local law enforcement, which, again, kind of poignant. And then they're treated as not being human, despite the fact that it's very clear that at least some of them, if not all of them, are capable of deep thinking. The prawn who makes the fuel can actually read and understands like eviction and things like that. So when he's being evicted, he asks, why am I being evicted? And this form says you need to give me 24 hours notice. And Vickers kind of like tries to manipulate him into signing the form by saying like, look, you've got a bunch of trash outside your house and you have a child, and I know you have a permit for that child, but even though you have a permit, or because you have a permit, we won't kill it, but we will take it because it's like we're going to turn it into CPS because your home isn't safe for him unless you sign this paper. And so he kind of like, there's just this really complex interaction there of like clearly just not valuing the ability of Christian to think and act accordingly in the world around him. It's very obvious that Vickers doesn't value this, even though he claims to value the life of the prawns. As soon as he is in an interaction with one that can kind of like compete with him on some level of intelligence, he immediately defaults to this like form of violent oppression, and like not empty threats, like threats that he will make good on. And so that's really, I mean, it is just really sad. And there is just this kind of constant presence of the fact that because the prawns look so different from humans, and because they haven't learned, quote unquote, to interact with humans, they shouldn't be given the title of personhood. They should be just considered a resource or considered like an inconvenience. They're moved around forcibly, kind of like other people in a lot of civilized histories. They're forced to move based off of the convenience and desires of other people or other things that have more power than them. And then they're like blatantly oppressed and taken advantage of for the resources that they do have to offer. And there's even specific mention of the fact that the prawns don't have a concept of personal property in the same way that we do at the very beginning of the movie. And that's almost just like a blatant, that's a very heavy-handed statement of like how a lot of civilized colonies interacted with other civilizations that weren't necessarily on the same track for the development of civilization that Western civilization had developed. So there's some pretty blatant commentary that's going on there, and I think that a lot of it gets lost in the commercialization of these ideas through the lens of like an action movie. And that's not a critique, because I do love the action scenes in this film. They're really great and unique and very like 2009, there was a lot of interesting cinematography going on in like the action movie world where they were just doing things that were different from what we were used to. And so this film absolutely does that very effectively. And I'm not trying to say that like it shouldn't have. I'm just saying that I think that originally at the outset, the intention of the directors, the intention of everybody involved in the project was probably to make a more meaningful commentary, and they got, I don't want to say like sidetracked necessarily, but maybe a little bottlenecked into needing to make the film more appealing to a larger audience. And the best way to do that is to throw in really good action scenes. And so I'm not saying that any part of that is wrong or better or worse than any other part. I'm just saying that we shouldn't miss out on the fact that this movie has a lot of good things to say about the human condition from the perspective of an oppressed peoples. And from the perspective of humans, because we get kind of like this weird hybrid experience of Vickers, who starts out as human and has all this like power, quote unquote, to do all these things and to oppress and to commit violence against the prawns. And eventually he becomes the person who is oppressed and having the violence committed against him. And in some capacity, if he had never been doing that, then he wouldn't have been forced to transform into them. And it's sad that the only way that he's able to like kind of understand their plight is to become one of them. And that's like in like a literal sense, because there is a way in which we can do that metaphorically. And I think that that's the way in which we solicit the most real change, is when we are open to and available to like real and meaningful empathy that actually solicits profound and meaningful change from individuals within a society, rather than like, okay, well, now that it affects me as well, I care. And like, it shouldn't have to affect us as individuals in our daily lives in order for us to care and want to see meaningful change happen for other, like, in this case it's species, but in like our case of what, like, you know, just current contexts, it shouldn't have to happen to us for us to care. And I think that there's this like idea that, you know, if things were just different, or if the prawns had just assimilated more, but like the prawns weren't given the opportunity to assimilate, and that in itself is a commentary on the way that Western civilization handles things that are different than itself. It just kind of intrinsically exists to take advantage of and reap benefit from other things that it can do so from. It exists in a very capricious way. And it's like the same commentary that Dan Simmons is making in Hyperion. It's just as meaningful and just as poignant. So I definitely think this film is worth watching. It's got a little bit of everything that's going on right now. A disease that you can't fight, and race relationships, or species relationships in this case. So again, this is not a political podcast. I'm not making any statements about whether or not certain things are right or wrong. I'm just emphasizing the fact that we as humans have certain characteristics that are imprinted on us, and that it's important for us to be aware of those. And this film is a good way to kind of make yourself a little bit more aware, because it does that thing that science fiction does, where it's able to distance you. It's able to give you significant distance from the issue at hand and get you to turn back around and say like, whoa, holy crap, this happens for real. So kind of leave that at that. Definitely recommend this movie. That's all I've got for you guys today. If you like the podcast, hit the like and subscribe button. Give us a 5-star review. Just give us a review in general. We prefer it to be 5 stars. Add us on Twitter. Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments or on Twitter or wherever you'd like to. Really interested in hearing what you all think of this movie. So thanks for listening. Again, stay safe, stay informed, and, you know, be kind, for goodness sakes. All right, everybody. Have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.